Hello and welcome. My name is Anthony England and I am with Full Orbit Games, and this is the developer update. Today I'd like to introduce our latest project, Tiny Space Academy. This is a 2D space sim where you're able to fly around and create your own space program. The concept for Tiny Space Academy came from a game jam that I participated in. The theme was small worlds. I wanted to create something that was similar to Kerbal Space Program mixed with Bad Piggies. I thought that was going to be fun to kind of build your own rockets, but fly in a two-dimensional space and just mess things up and explode rockets. This original concept was pretty neat, but it was very restrictive. I originally started off with the Game Jam version. I knew creating that I would have to scrap a lot of the work I've already done. Tiny Space Academy is currently being developed in Unreal Engine. I prefer Unreal Engine because of the blueprint scripting that it has. I originally started with the gravitational mechanics. In the Game Jam version, I didn't realize at the time that Unreal uses frame rate to determine physics and how often it is applied. The issue is when you have a weaker computer, the physics would slow down. I decided to change this into a timer-based event, which was slightly better for making sure that physics is only applied every 0.1 of a second or something similar to that. This worked out a lot of the kinks, but I do feel that more testing will be required because I only have a few computers I can test this on. I then moved on to the way the modules are assembled. In the Game Jam version, I had a grid system that you would place modules into, similar to Bad Piggies. However, I decided to scrap that system because it was too restrictive on what you could build. I decided to go with a snap-based system where you are able to grab a node and snap it to another node. This was a very clean system and allowed me to make unique rockets in the testing. I then added a rotation option to rotate the module in any direction, 360 degrees. After revamping the assembly process, I created a bunch of test modules, fuel tanks, capsules, engines, and decouplers. There was a few modules that required a little bit more work, decoupling. I wanted to create a module that you could decouple other modules from its side rockets or its vertical components. So I have a vertical decoupler and a side decoupler. There will be multiple versions of this in the long run for different size rockets and fuel tanks. I added solar panels that can retract, but I have yet to implement the practical use for them. In a future dev video, I will be showcasing electricity as a resource to maintain your spacecraft and power. I added a docking module. This will allow the spacecraft, once it gets into a certain proximity of another docking module, it will be able to kind of pull the two spacecrafts together a little bit. You have to be fairly close, so you have to use some skill to get the rocket ship within a certain space, but the idea was to make it more automatic, so it's less stress about trying to line up the docking ports perfectly. I also created and added air resistance and re-entry burn, so that when a capsule is returning from space, it will have the burn streaks. So I worked on the graphics for a bit. The art style for the planets, I wanted to do similar vector, so it's like a solid lines, but the problem is when you zoom out versus zoomed in, you need to make it like a good clean transition. I still am going to tweak this a little bit. I'm not quite happy with everything, especially on the moon. There will be more on this in the future, and I'll be happy to share it with you. One of the major issues with the Game Jam version is I noticed that the players would launch their rocket at full throttle and would just fly off into oblivion. There was no guidance on how much thrust you would need to orbit a planet. So I knew that a trajectory system would be required. I decided to go with a math-based system to make ellipses. I use Kepler's laws to determine the size of an ellipse based on vector and radius from the planet. So surprisingly, I mean, this did take me a few weeks to design, but it did turn out the way I wanted it to. There are a few things I do want to fix before I have the final version, but it is very close to accurate. I knew from the start I wanted to have an astronaut that could walk around, pick up rocks, do research in science, plant flags. The original idea for this is I wanted to have the astronaut in the Game Jam version, but I didn't have time to create that. I watched a bunch of tutorials on how to create a sprite animation for the character. I created multiple frames of the astronaut in movement, as well as planting flags, swimming, picking up rocks. The astronaut is going to be a great way for the player to explore the planet and to look for treasures and hidden areas in the planet. The astronaut can do an EVA from the capsule in space and fly around the spacecraft as needed and enter other spacecrafts. Everything still applies to the astronaut, including gravity, and if you go on the moon, you have less gravity, so you'll be able to jump higher, for instance. I am happy with how the astronaut turned out. I may revisit this to clean up the mechanics a little bit, but that will be in a future dev video. After creating some of the core game mechanics, so the player can now launch a rocket, orbit a planet, land a rocket, I had to create some of the abilities to save a game and to save different rocket designs. I created a system that would save the game. I haven't developed the autosave yet, but that may come in the future. But you can save a game and load it from where you left off. I also created a rocket design saver. So you can design your rocket, save it for later, edit the design, save it again, do whatever you need to do to save your rockets. What's coming next is more modules. I plan to add larger fuel tanks and engines, fairings, landing gears, lander modules, and a few others. Also, we'll be working on tooltips, so when you hover over a module in the assembly, you'll know what the module does, as well as its specs. I'll also be adding electricity as a resource, science, and research. Please stay tuned for future developer updates, where I get to showcase some of these features. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this video so far, please subscribe and give us a thumbs up. This will help with the YouTube algorithm. If you have any comments, please leave them below. I appreciate any feedback I get and ways I can improve this game. And thank you for the support.